Okay, I think we're ready to begin. Welcome everyone to the Net Natives presentation on the impact of the coronavirus on college education. Today we're going to be diving into our recent US student survey, its results, and some of the conclusions we have drawn. My name is Lee Harrison. I'm an account director here at Net Natives in our New York office. And just to give a quick 5-second overview of those who do not know who Net Natives are, we're a specialist student consultancy. Net Natives have a 12-year history dedicated to student recruitment and in the education space. We've recruited over 1 million students from 150 countries worldwide and for about 150 institutions. We have 4 offices in the world, in the US, the UK, and China, and we have a vast experience in running campaigns in the HE sector, including promoting B2C offerings such as short courses, undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. Now, less of that, and let's get into it. The survey that we've taken recently about asking college students about coronavirus is going to be the backbone of this webinar. I just want to give a little information into what that entails and where that's going to get the data. Students make up one of the most diverse groups in the world, yet often their emotions and opinions are quickly generalized into a quick overview of what society thinks students should be feeling. In order to really understand this complex and vast group of individuals, you must talk to them directly, and that's what we did. We commissioned new research to just do that. We conducted a deep dive survey with over 200 American students. They shared with us how they feel about the pandemic we're all currently living through, how this is impacting their social lives, education, and mental well-being, and so much more. This webinar aims to give you an overview and some insights into our findings. I hope to give you some data-driven insights to inform and pivot content and communication strategies to ensure you're catering for what students really want right now. As you'd expect with any decent survey, the range of responses was across the board, giving a great representation and barometer to student sentiments and feelings. I'm going to be honest now, I'm going to give you a little spoiler into the rest of the talk with the next slides with key 6 findings from our surveys, but later on I'm going to dive deeper into each going forward. Their response was clear. Nearly half of students said they do not feel safe on their university campus, and they want their institution to better enforce COVID-19 restrictions and keep classes online. 46% of students felt unsafe on campus, and 54% felt safe. When we asked each group why they answered this way, those who answered with feeling safe told us it was because they increased testing or they left campus altogether. Students also felt, on the whole, 6 out of 10, the pandemic has negatively impacted their own student experience and education. Now here's something very alarming. 1 in 10 students say they're considering dropping out either before or over the Christmas holidays. The digital education experience isn't as bad as you may think, with 83% of students saying they continue their course if it went fully online. Students are also seeing huge negative impacts on their social lives, an important aspect of the university experience, with 7 in 10 students saying social life have been negatively impacted due to the pandemic. We know that these relationships are crucial elements to the connectedness a student feels to their college and school. So with a dropout trend predicted for the coming months, these struggles definitely need noting. We're now going to dive a little deeper in a bit more detail into these pain points and the data behind them. To begin this webinar, we really want to start with where the students have been and upon the return to study. The day of the standard student processes are currently on pause, and typical student journey is no more. As such, over 1/3 of students have actually been on campus over the last month, whilst only 20% of students are actually staying in their residences. This only highlights how there have been so many differing solutions and to delivering education across the board, varying state and city laws and fueling wildly different scenarios across the whole United States. Interestingly enough, the number staying permanently indoors in dorms is really substantially lower than the amount attending. Most students who have actually been staying in dorms have chosen to opt for a quasi solution, where they're temporary dorm residents, opting to be in dorms when they want to, not when they feel they need to. Later on, I'll dive deeper into why this is, but we feel from this survey you cannot underestimate the power of university's social interactions and the necessity for some face-to-face teaching and social aspects. Schools can be an escape for some, and this is a key theme to the findings and answers from our poll students. The mental fatigue and its impact will be a common theme throughout this presentation. How you can entice your students back to campus, ensuring it's safe and worthwhile for them to do so, and articulating this to potential future students will both be key questions I'll try to answer. The single commonality that stood out from our results was the wide variety of solutions being used from schools and colleges to move forward with education. Only 20% of students have had face-to-face learning. Interestingly, this correlates nicely with the numbers in dorms as to be expected. The number, whilst not exact, shows that those in full-time or part-time dorms, are often the ones who are having face-to-face education, a continuing part of their education. 8 in 10 students have actually not had any face-to-face learning during this pandemic. Only 2% said they're learning full-time face-to-face. Interestingly, those who did say they're having face-to-face learnings say it was socially distanced, but also strange and sometimes uncomfortable to be part of. A quote that really stood out for me from the survey: "It is strange feeling to be in a room with others, yet feel alone, because everyone is afraid or mad about the virus situation." I think these two previous slides perfectly frame the rest of the webinar and the results. They also articulate what now is becoming more important to students and their current future needs and wants. Not everyone is going to be in the same boat going forward, and that's both from their own personal perspective and what students and colleges are offering. Communication in brand and marketing, and also post-acceptance, is something we really tried to focus on in our survey. With a plethora of news sources quoting thousands of data points, facts, and stories every day, we want to find out exactly how students feel about the communication that mattered to them. A key find was 9 in 10 students found their college did a good job in communicating exactly what was to be expected. We're glad to see this, and also the fact this really adds value to the questions we posed. Students knew what they were going through on the whole, and therefore the emotional response to the questions would be limited, and we feel would tend to ignore too much emotional bias from things changing in the last minute and the original perceptions that they originally had. Of the negative responses, a theme here was transparency and planning. Students have not responded well to last minute changes or when plans were implemented without proper rationale or reasoning. Obviously, in these trying times, things can change by the second. Therefore, it's probably to be expected. But understanding this and having a structured crisis plan with clearly defined communication could really help make the difference to student experience going forward. We touched heavily on social aspects in our survey, and undoubtedly the figures of social interaction and how life has been affected stood out. So many aspects of student life are important to the full story, but the highest negative response we found from this survey was on students' social life. A plethora of different reasons existed on the whole, but the changes have undoubtedly had a huge impact. 7 in 10 students said their social life had been negatively impacted by this pandemic. Lack of ability in making new friends, loss of key interactions with old, and students' love life seem to be key factors controlling the overall negative response. Often the social aspect of university and school life is taken for granted by colleges and schools. It's regularly a key determinant in students' educational decision making, and therefore is often well utilized as an asset in marketing and communication outreach, even though completely and sometimes devoid of actual any input from the university itself. 95% of students said they're not partied since coronavirus, and we were happy to see this. But a key response was that the usual definition of a party was also, there was also a key response here was the usual definition of a party, but also the fact that social interactions as part and parcel of the school itself had been removed. Concerts, sports, and shows are just 3 of the types of events that schools and student bodies typically run throughout the year that have all now been limited or completely stopped in recent times. Pair that with the added ripple events spawned from these type of events, tailgates, house parties, or even a pre-coffee show. The overall impact has been exacerbated in ways beyond these initial impacts. As analysts at McKinsey & Company have recently noted, many higher institutions in the US are essentially micro-cities, not just schools, but employers, residents, healthcare providers, and entertainment centers for the many. Understanding this and embracing it can be key for student numbers going forward, and essential in lowering those potential dropouts mentioned earlier. Most students already expect an online and digital teaching, but embracing a social solution for more palliative aspects of student life can make all the difference between enjoying their experience and dropping out of school. As we evolve and adapt to the new norms caused by COVID-19, the peer-to-peer digital experience has only become more key in the short to medium term. We've all felt the social isolation of working from home at times, and pairing that with starting a new school or returning to school, I don't think we could fully comprehend the feeling of loneliness and separation that some will be feeling right now. Obviously, one of the main purposes of school and colleges and universities in general is education. This slide is there probably the most surprising, important, and therefore is probably one of the most interesting in my deck. Whilst the consensus of this report is there has been a negative impact on the quality of education, it isn't as uniform as to be expected, with 20% of applicants thinking it's actually an improvement and around 20% considering there's been no change at all. this actually isn't as doom as gloom as some might have expected. Overall, 38% of students haven't found like the change in learning has affected or been a detriment to the quality of their education. Zoom, Google Meet, GoToWebinar, and a variety of other solutions of conference platforms in the market have stepped up in the place of lecture theatres and classrooms. Even though they are not built for education, the uptake response has been relatively successful. The fact that these were not built for purpose gives optimism for the negative perception to only decrease in the future. In fact, only this week I saw a Zoom for Classrooms being launched. This is focusing on creating a connection between digital communication and classroom essentials, and just one of the many products being created for this new normality. These new platforms can only improve this experience going forward and ensure teaching quality doesn't drop. On the flip side, however, 63% of students is still a high number who've been negatively affected. This is something we've tried to dive deeper into and get a real full understanding and picture of what has caused this and why it's so high. A worrying trend is seemingly the increase in education inequality. With a new added cost base of education, and added that the complexity of furloughed and fired guardians, an uncertain job market, and the decimation of the gig and service economy, many low-income households face really uncertain times. Low-income students are 50% more likely now more than ever than their affluent peers to expect a delayed graduation due to no COVID-19, a gap which disappears once accounting for the differential financial burdens and health risks imposed by COVID-19. I have a quote here from Emily Daniels, the Chief External Officer of America Needs You, who are a non-profit organization to help improve economic mobility for ambitious first-generation college students. Our students are coming to us with more frequency for things outside of career development, including social and emotional support, financial assistance, and community referrals. We've seen our case management increase significantly since the crisis happened. We saw the highest number of applicants to join our program we've seen in the last 5 years, and I know it's linked to this crisis. If you haven't heard of the work that America Needs You do, I do recommend checking them out following on to this webinar. If schools want to mitigate this downfall, they need now to be able to adjust and help in ways they may potentially have never been able before. For example, allowing students to easily adjust their course load, timing of assignments, tuition payment schedule, or mode of instruction would allow them to be more active in decisions in their personal environment and minimize disruption to their education as the pandemic progresses. Likewise, allowing students to switch between online and in-person classes will allow them to choose the option which best fits their specific and variable housing, work, and health situations. Allowing students to defer tuition payments if they suddenly become unable to pay due to COVID-19 provides valuable insurance to students who may otherwise choose to delay enrollment until more certain times. Flexibility can extend into the classroom as well. Providing students a more flexible assignment schedule may allow them to easily adapt to changes in their work schedule, family commitments, which may arise due to COVID-19. And these suggestions though, do impose additional costs, monetary or otherwise, on universities, but may be necessary to prevent widening gaps in higher education and large student dropout numbers. If schools are implementing these services, it becomes more vital than ever to articulate this both to the current student body, but also potential students that could be held back by not having these solutions implemented. Universities and colleges as organizations have tried to adjust and have students and staff be safe in these times. Obviously, a lot of actions have already been taken to improve safety and limit the spread. Their processes are already happening, and wanted to find out exactly what actions students were seeing implemented during COVID-19. We asked what students had seen their college and universities do during this time, and the results are listed in this slide. Most of these you would completely expect, and some on the scale potentially not. For me, the main surprises were the low social bubble percentages and the higher than expected testing percentage. Both have been recommended highly by the CDC to help limit and control the virus, so it's great to see things are being implemented. All of the institutions I have spoken personally to are undertaking nearly all, if not all, of the items listed here to limit the spread of COVID-19 amongst its staff. So potentially here, a problem might be the gap in what students are seeing and what is actually being done. This is a problem itself, and unfortunately we can't, and we don't have the data to back up my theory, and we can't deliver into it. But a takeaway would be is universities should and need to ensure communication is clear, and I think that became clear earlier on. What we do have though is how we feel students are, and universities, what we do have here is how universities and colleges are enforcing the rules and how students feel about it. Whilst the vast majority of the students we polled could easily point out precautions their college or university had made or adopted, it wasn't a simple picture when we asked how much these are being enforced. Unfortunately, there's a gap between expectations and reality here. It is also something that universities are going to have to deal with. Unfortunately, the rules are not being followed by a large portion of the student body. Rules are only as good as the people following them, and the issues arise when a large portion of the student base do not. Just 55% said their college had been enforcing these policies all of the time, and 42% said some of the time, and 3% said that their college had not followed any of the guidelines they put in place. Those who felt unsafe said other students weren't following the rules, and they thought that other students were infected and could spread the virus to them. The fear of the virus is causing anxiety and worry, creating mental angst, and this is a common theme throughout most of our questioning. Again, the mental stress and pressures of COVID sometimes here weighed heavier on students than the actual implications to their education caused by changes in policy. Expanding on this, we then asked students if they felt safe on campus because of these factors. 46% of students, they do not feel safe on campus. And those who felt unsafe said their college could make them feel more safe by enforcing stricter regulations or keeping classes 100% online. I felt like this was one of the best sections to really pull out some of the quotes that we received. There are a few here on the slide. I'll just give you a few seconds to read a few of them. But I think the key one is the first one on the left-hand side. Not all students adhering to safety guidelines. It was a common theme, and it was a big fear of what a lot of the students were progressing. Following the rules is obviously been something that a lot of people aren't doing, and students are worried about that. Catching the virus and getting the virus was only part of it. It was just making sure that they felt safe was a big underlying study. Moving on from mentioning, however, how a lot of them felt being safe online, I think this slide sums up perfectly some of the future points and some of the future ways that we can go to really improve the experience and grow student numbers and ensure dropouts are low. When discussing the two main different modes of learning, positively, 83% of those who did receive face-to-face learning said they would continue their studies if it went fully online. Pairing that with the advent of new and improved digital technologies I've mentioned earlier, it's not all doom and gloom. However, 5% said they would not continue, and the remainder were unsure on how to respond if classes go fully online. With a potential 18% of students at least considering not continuing their studies if they go fully online, it's a sentiment we should really pay attention to. The last poll question I'm going to look at might have been one of the stats that drew you here today, and is a bit of a startling statistic. 1 in 10 students are currently thinking about dropping out before or over the Christmas. And pairing that with it being the most likely time to go home, this is a very worrying statistic. Hopefully today we've addressed some of the pain points and looked at some of the pain points that universities and colleges and schools can look at in addressing, making sure that the numbers are lower than expected. But it is a worrying time for a lot of people. People are fearful, scared, and unsure of this and uncertain on the future. With the US election just around the corner as well, doubt is big and weighing on people's minds. So to give a little insight into what does this all mean and how can it affect you and campaigns and how it can affect companies and their brand, student attitudes and needs are changing. And so adjustments in marketing and messages might be needed. One small example I've tried to pull here, and everything we spoke about, is the difference in student searches and implications from those searches. Here I've pulled the last 5 years of search terms and trends for both international study and local study. Both are very interesting and both paint a very clear picture of what's going on in the market. As you see here, the historical cyclical nature of studying abroad abruptly stopped this year. Conversely, the study for local options, which has been constant for 5 years, has seen a tripling in searches in recent years. The spike there was in June, just as you can see. What this means is students are no longer looking as far afield as they used to, and effectively looking closer to home to look for their next steps. No longer is the grass necessarily greener on the other side, and students want to stay somewhere where they feel safe and there is less uncertainty. It's also at home is a place where they also feel most confident in their future, and also safe and confident that they will be safe in there. There are two main ways to relate this back to consideration in marketing and recruitment campaigns. Depending one is negative and one's potentially positive. The negative side of this is if you're looking for students for further afield than your local market, you might need to put in more work to generate and convert leads. It could be harder to convince students to move to you. You might need to put more work and more effort into convincing them that you're safe, you're creating policies that make them feel good, and your education quality is going to still be there. On the positive side, this could open up whole new pots of students that were not potentially in your thought process. A new standard pot of students where people who maybe wanted to move abroad, move to a different part of the country, are now looking closer to home to find that level of education. The other side of this coin as well is the increase in searches can also and should influence your creativity. Whilst not all searches are related to international and local searches, the theme is obviously something that's relating right now for the student audience. Growing your brand to match this and actually developing your brand could really resonate with students. Pitching how you support your local area could really resonate right now because it's something that they're looking at. Hopefully you've had some good insights into this, and I hope you enjoyed the session today. There is a questions section there, and I'm just about to conclude, and if you do have any questions, please feel free and I'll try and address them at the end. If not, I'm also going to put my contact details in the final slide, so I'm more than happy for you to just reach out to me to talk through. And I'll also share the slides with everyone, plus a bit more of an in-depth deck with more details of the survey and the results. But I'm just going to finish up with a few little conclusions, just to follow on from what everyone's saying. Doubt and uncertainty are definitely the two key issues I've seen throughout this whole of this and what I've spoken about. Now more than ever, students are turning to universities, colleges and schools to provide more stability, assurance that they will deliver not only the education, but the student experience in full. I feel right now, NABE's mission statement is as important as ever, and pardon the self-promotion here, I've tried to avoid it for most of the presentation so far, but I'm just going to read it out to you. We think student, we do, we learn, we refine, and we apply what we've learned, just like students, and let's face it, we can all be a bit more student. Impact is something to aspire to, look beyond impressions, reach, clicks, conversion, and enrollment, and inspire, focus on the bigger picture. More students inquiring, applying, and enrolling. Let's work together. And look, some just very fine things. How do we achieve what students want? And I think that the key and main one for me is don't be afraid of the digital world. And students are craving digital events. Under 25s, the typical student body today grew up online. They grew up with mobile phones, digital access to the world. They grew up with FaceTime, Facebook Messenger. They understand and appreciate and use media and the digital world in ways we'd never comprehended 15, 20 years ago. Don't be afraid to do that. And don't just look at it for your education and schooling. Look in ways where you can involve and engage with the student body above and beyond education, socially, interactively. Create groups and create virtual socializations that will work. Thank you everyone so much for joining today. I do appreciate everyone's time and effort. As all our details for all our offices are below. If you do want to contact me, my email address is there, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you do and may have on today's presentation. I look forward to speaking to some of you in the future, and look forward to hopefully working with some of you as well. All the best. Bye.